Well, hello everyone. Today, this video will not be about astronomy. It will be about something much more important. It's about colonoscopies. The reason I want to talk about colonoscopy is because I recently had one. And it wasn't for anything serious, but during the lead up to the colonoscopy, I spent a lot of time researching it. I spent a lot of time researching the consequences of people not having colonoscopies, i.e., colon cancer. They're the most extreme case, but there are other issues that can occur with the colon that I also ended up looking into. The reason is because I want to help people get more colonoscopies and try to prevent the fear that I had when I made the decision to ultimately get a colonoscopy, and two, prevent the fear and anxiety that I had leading up to the colonoscopy. The reason I had a colonoscopy was because it's time. I reached an age in which it was time. But obviously, if you don't realize that the age to have a colonoscopy was decreased from 50 to 45 years, and you've probably seen this as it relates to breast cancer, they decreased the screening age from 50 to 40 because more and more young people are being diagnosed with cancer. Now, it's still a low percentage, but it has increased enough that the medical community has decided to decrease the age so that they can start catching, if a patient has it, cancer sooner, so that the survival rate increases. Because what's been happening is that by the time a young person has actually been presented with symptoms, the cancer is so far advanced that it can be treated, but it can't be cured. And you might be wondering, well, why are you talking about medical issues on an astronomy channel? Because even though I love astronomy, my background is in medicine. I'm a biomedical engineer by training, and I really do love medicine. And therefore, because of my experiences and the issues that people have with colonoscopy, and the issues that colonoscopy is the second and or third leading cause of death in I believe it's the second leading form of cancer death in the U.S. and the third leading cause of death in the United States. And part of the reason is that people do not get screened. And by the time, for plenty of reasons, and by the time they present symptoms to the doctor, the cancer is so far advanced that it's difficult to treat. It's either stage 3 or stage 4. And basically, when I talk about stages as it relates to cancer, it's how far the cancer cells have traveled into the body, how far advanced the cancer is as it relates to the cancer of a particular organ, and whether that cancer has begun to metastasize and spread to other parts of the body. And therefore, once it gets to those stages, it's extremely difficult to treat. The survival rate goes down, and therefore, one of the ways to prevent this from occurring as it relates to the colon is to have colonoscopies. And therefore, I want to talk about my experience with colonoscopies, getting over my fear so that it can help anyone who listens to the video. So let's begin. I decided to get a colonoscopy, as I mentioned earlier, is that because it was time. And I wanted, at the time I made this decision, I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's do this. And as time progressed, I ended up researching it more. And I will tell you that if you Google and Reddit can be your friends, but as it relates to anything medicine related, it can be your worst enemy. Because most of the time, the articles that have the greatest hits, the people who end up commenting are the ones who are the worst case scenarios. That doesn't mean it can't happen. It's just that those are the worst case scenarios. And the mind in this period oftentimes focus on the negative. And the negative would be the extreme as it relates to cancer or those type of things. And you want to be at peace. You want to be calm. You want to be confident. You want to think that you're going to be okay. And I didn't do that. I looked at Google, I looked at Reddit, and my mind, I started getting anxious. I started getting panicked, and eventually I will go in and out because once I said I'm not going to look at it anymore, and I calm down, but then I would just go back on there. And I realized that if I had to do it all over again, I would have just spoken to my friends, spoken to my family, because as I opened up about it, they opened up too. Like, yeah, I had colonoscopies, everything was fine, the prep was okay, or the prep was bad. And that actually listening to people that I know, that I trusted, put me at ease that everything was going to be okay. So the first thing is that when you sign up for a colonoscopy, stay off Reddit, stay off Google. The second thing is the prep is much better than it was many years ago. Now, I've had friends who say the prep was fine. They didn't have any issues. And I had people who say that the prep was horrific. To me, the prep was somewhat in between. It sometimes depends on the type of prep that you have. Sometimes it depends on how often you have to take it and what you're doing. But all I can tell you is the prep that I had with the soup prep, it tasted like it's like lemonade mixed with molasses. It had a sweet taste to it, but it was sweet to the point of you don't want to drink it. Like that first sip, I was like, okay, I can do this. And then I just started sipping it and sipping more of it, and all of a sudden, I was like, what am I doing? It seemed like it was just slowly, because it's 16 ounces. Because it's soup prep, it's like a bottle of soup prep mixed with water all the way up to 16 ounces. And it just slowly started to go down, but I just kept downing it. And eventually, I was able to get through it, because at least for me, you have to take it a day before and a day of the procedure. On top of, especially if it's the day before the procedure, an all liquid diet. But a lot of people usually had issues with that, but I was fine with just drinking Gatorade. That seemed to have sustained me, well, Gatorade and water, and that seemed to have sustained me before the actual procedure. Of course, the day leading up to it, you also have to cut back on nuts, berries, basically things that can stay in the colon take some time for your body to digest, or remain in the colon and can confuse the doctor when they look at it, because you can't drink anything red, or I remember red, not sure about purple, but it's definitely red, and therefore you kind of have to start cleaning out the colon. But anyway, so after slowly changing my diet, going to an all liquid diet, taking the soup prep, that wasn't the best. But I was able to down it, and I was quite proud of myself. Although I did dread the next day, the day of the procedure, having to do it again. But anyway, I've read that once you take the first half of the laxative, that you'll instantly start going to the bathroom. Now, you have to clean out your colon. Everybody's body, everybody's colon is different. I didn't feel the effects of the laxative. I took it at 6 p.m. Nothing happened until 3 a.m. And that's when it started. Now, if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have called the doctor after about 2-3 hours. which is what is recommended. But I didn't do that because I was thinking, oh, well, if by the time I get to the second prep, everything was fine. And everything ended up turning to be fine. So I started to empty my colon. Then it became the day of the procedure. I woke up, had a calm state of mind, tried to keep myself calm. Unfortunately, I ended up going back on Reddit, which didn't help matters. And then I had my second dose, the second half of the soup prep. Continued to go to the bathroom, and then the time just slowed down. The time just slowed. And I ended up doing a lot of things. I ended up just thinking about different outcomes. Like I mentioned, I'm an engineer by training, so I was thinking about different outcomes. But I kept remembering what my friends said, that everything was going to be fine. You got this. And I just stayed in my thoughts. I went out for a walk once I felt like I was empty from the procedure. I was empty, and eventually it came time to the appointment and time to go to the appointment. But I will say I kept thinking that I can always back out. If I don't want to go through with it, I can always back out. But I knew deep down that I wasn't going to do that. But I think I said that to make myself feel better. Eventually, it was time to go. Now, for colonoscopies, especially in the U.S., they're often done under anesthesia. And one of the things that people don't like is you have to find someone to take you. Either a friend, family member. You can't use a taxi, can't use Uber, can't use Lyft. But if you're in a situation in which don't have a friend, friends can't do it, you're not near any family, you do have the option of medical transport. Most facilities allow medical transport, which is not a taxi, it's a medical transport because there are senior citizens, there are people who aren't able, and they'll take you to medical appointments and they'll take you back safely to your home because after a medical appointment. So that's what I ended up doing. And it was a smooth ride. They took me there. I entered the facility and I walked up to the receptionist. They asked me for my insurance. They asked me for who is taking me back. I gave them the medical transport for his name and phone number information. And then I sat. And by this point, I was really, really anxious. So I actually ended up getting up and walking out a few times just to calm myself. Because at those points, I really thought about backing out. But I decided that I'm going to face my fear. Regardless of what happens, I'm going to face my fear. So I went back into the facility. They called me to the back. They took you to, basically take you to, not necessarily a room, but it was in the enclosed space. Get out of your clothes, put on a gown. They'll attach the IV. They'll take your blood pressure. Now at this point, especially if it's your first colonoscopy, you more than likely will be nervous because you don't know what they're going to find. Because many colon cancer symptoms are similar to other issues with the colon, and oftentimes it doesn't have any symptoms. There are stories of people going in there and they find something. So you don't know. It could be anything from hemorrhoids all the way to cancer. You don't know. And therefore, I was extremely nervous. I was extremely scared. But one thing that I learned is that the health professionals, they deal with this situation thousands of times. Millions, well, can't say millions, but thousands of times. And they understand what a patient is going through. So don't hesitate if you're scared, if you're nervous, if you're anxious, to let people know, to let them know. And they'll do their best to try to calm you down. This was also my first time being under anesthesia. So I was also scared about that. And even though you're supposed to turn off your phone, they did give me the option while we were waiting for me to use my phone. So at least keep me at ease. I decided to do that. I decided to just sit there and think. And it really doesn't hit you until they roll you out and they roll you into the operating room. Now, the operating room can be intimidating because the doctor's there. If you have an anesthesiologist, the person will be there. But they'll still talk to you. So if you're still nervous and anxious, you can still talk to them. They explain everything to me. And if you decide to do it with anesthesia, this is the best part of the procedure. Not for the anesthesia, but that once they administer it, you'll be out in like 5 to 10 seconds. And the next thing you know, you're waking up and they're wheeling you out. The procedure is, that's pretty much a colonoscopy procedure. Now, if you decide to do it with sedation or mild sedation, you'll still be awake, but you'll be so relaxed that you won't know what's going on. You won't remember anything. If you decide to do it without anesthesia or sedation, then you'll be alert. But again, depending on how you feel, you might get nerves might get to you. Even though there aren't any nerves in the colon, you might feel something as they try to go around. Most people don't feel anything. Some people do feel something. So you do have options. But anyway, they wheeled me out. I was groggy, and I was talking and they'll often give you something to drink, give you something mild to eat. Some places give you something mild to eat. And then in my situation, they gave me some apple juice, and the nurse basically told me everything was okay. Everything was okay. There weren't any issues. No polyps found. Everything's fine. So that really put me at ease. And then the doctor came in, told me everything was okay. There weren't necessarily any issues, and that was it. Then they wheeled me. I walked out. The medical transporter was there. They put me in a wheelchair, put me in the van, and took me home. And that was my colonoscopy. Now, if they find something, oftentimes, if it's a polyp, which is the great thing about a colonoscopy, if it's a polyp, they find a polyp in your colon, they'll remove it. They'll remove it right there because 99.9% of colon cancers come from polyps. And if they remove the polyp, then you don't have to worry about it. Now, they'll do a biopsy to determine what type of polyp it is, and that will determine how soon you have to come back. But you don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's how you protect yourself. If it's a hemorrhoid, then you're fine. Those are relatively mild. Oftentimes those are self-treatable, so you can treat those yourself. The great thing about a colonoscopy, though, is because if they find cancer, sometimes depending on what stage is that, they might be able to remove it there. But the earlier they detect it, the more likely you can cure it, which is the most important thing. And they can let you know any other things that are going on with the colon. As it relates to insurance, oftentimes insurance will cover screening colonoscopies, which basically means you don't have any issues, you're over 40, you're 45 and above, and you're screening colonoscopy. It's a screening colonoscopy. They're just like any other screening test. It's more than likely will be fully covered by insurance. If you are there because you have a symptom, it's known as a diagnostic colonoscopy, and therefore the insurance might not cover all of it, which I think is insanity, but that's a healthcare issue that we have, at least in the United States. But it'll cover some of it, and you should still be able to have the colonoscopy. Another issue is time for the colonoscopy. A lot of people work, a lot of people have issues, not issues, but things that prevent them from doing, or perceived things that prevent them from doing it. For me, the only day that I had to take off was the colonoscopy day itself. Everything leading up to it, I went to work. I was able to still do my job. And I took the day off for the colonoscopy. And then I was back to work the next day. Even the day for the prep. Because oftentimes, depending on your procedure, my prep happened in the evening at 6 p.m. So it was already after work. I did the liquid diet during the day, but I was able to take the laxative in the evening. And therefore, when I was having to relieve myself and defecate, I was already at home. So that took care of that. Then there's the fear of the colonoscopy itself. If you decide to do it with anesthesia, they just knock you out. You don't even know what happened. You're in the operating room. They'll have you talk. They'll administer anesthesia. You're knocked out. 5 seconds later, which is really 20, 30, 40 minutes, depending on what's going on, they're willing you out. That's the procedure. Pretty much, that's it. So I can tell you, it's one of the easiest procedures in the world because they knock you out and you're on your way. So all I can tell you is that colon cancer is a deadly form of cancer, but it's also highly preventable. It's highly treatable, but you have to get yourself checked. You have to take advantage of the technology that we have to prevent or treat this horrific disease. And I hope you learned from my experience. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will respond, and I'll see you again. And this time it will actually be another astronomy video.